Welcome, beautiful people of all ages, shapes, and colors, to another episode of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, where we encourage you to stick to the basics. I'm one of your co-hosts, TV, aka TV on Basketball, alongside my co-host Jay, aka the Knockdown Jay. How's it going, my guy?
TV, this is one of those episodes that I think internally, on this side of the camera, we have been hyping up for probably about the last week and a half. Um, I'm really excited to finally talk about this because I feel like it's something that we've been sitting on for a while. We were just talking about it off pod that we've never done this on the Hit Your Free Throws podcast before. And that's kind of weird considering it's one of the most clickbaity topics in sports. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's easily one of the best clickbait topics you can have. And we still just have not gotten around to it. So it only feels right that now that the offseason is starting to slowly dwindle down into USA Olympics basketball and even the WNBA is about to go on pause. It feels like the perfect time to really sit down and have this conversation.
100%. And guys, there's gonna be no BS over here. It's one episode for all this. We have a quiz at the end. We still have a quiz at the end. But today's episode, we are going through our top 10 players in the NBA as of the making of this video, as of today. That's gonna be the episode. We usually have multiple topics, and as we have a draft thrown in there, but we have one thing we're going through today. And we're going to be talking about that due to this podcast. It's going to be an awesome episode. If you want to see a little bit of a preview of what I did, by the way, yesterday on the TikTok, I did my 16 to 12. So if you want to check out kind of guys who just missed the cut, check out the TikTok and Instagram. But it's going to be a good episode nonetheless. So we're going to get right into that shortly. But before we do, I do have to plug our socials. Remember to follow our individual socials at TV on Basketball, at the Knockdown J. Those individual links will be found in the description down below. In terms of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, for the daily content, check out the TikTok and Instagram. We have filter videos there. We have summer league news. We have new updates. We have this stuff about the guys who just missed on the cut. All this type of content you can find on the TikTok and Instagrams, and all these videos are posted daily. So be on the lookout for that. In terms of YouTube, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you will not miss an episode. And if you're listening to us on either of the podcast networks, Spotify or Apple, please remember to leave a review. Subscribe, all that good stuff. We really do appreciate all of your support. Jay, are you ready to get into this? This is going to be a freaking heavy episode.
Man, TV, I just switched something around on this list again. We better get started before I end up second guessing myself.
Bro, I mean, you ain't lying. I freaking changed up this list 3 times over the past week. You said you did it about 8 times. So this is it. We put some thought into this. So we're gonna definitely go into this first. So without further ado, let's get into this top 10. But before we get into the top 10, we have each one guy that just missed the cut of the top 10, and we're going to go through these guys really quickly. Jay, who do you have at your number 11, the guy who just missed out?
Okay, so I literally just switched this now, and me and TV had a little bit of a short conversation that kind of helped influence this a little bit. But the guy who just fell out was a guy that before the pod even turned on was just barely in. I'm going to go with Kawhi Leonard at 11.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Kawhi Leonard. That's a really interesting one because me and Jay talked about this off the pod. This is how you know this list might be kind of crazy because I have Kawhi even when I was thinking of my 16 to 12 video yesterday, I have him at number 17. So the fact that he has him at number 11 kind of shows you how we kind of value both of our lists. So you have him at number 11. My honorable mention for this, man, I have Devin Booker.
See, I completely understand that too. Why you have him barely off? Again, this makes that list kind of funny because I don't have him as low as you. And that's saying a lot, right? Considering this is your number 11 guy, right? But at the end of the day, that just goes to show you, again, it comes down to value. For example, I'll give you a second to explain your thoughts on Devin Booker. But for me with Kawhi Leonard, at the end of the day, anybody who's been listening to this podcast knows that I truly value availability as a very elite skill in itself in terms of being considered a superstar elite level player. And Kawhi Leonard, that is probably his worst basketball ability, which obviously does dictate part of where he does fall on this list. Actually, this list is kind of dictated a lot by things like age and injury history a lot. But the one thing that took me kind of out of my element in terms of where to position certain guys, specifically with Kawhi Leonard, is yes, he is super injury prone, but when he is on the floor, and I know we do this every single year with Kawhi, but when he is on the floor, he's just a different animal. Even last year, he played about what 50, just a little bit over 50 games last year. There was a
Oh
point
no,
last season.
no, he was on the All NBA second team. He played 65 plus games.
Yeah, no, you're right, exactly. He because he was eligible for it. You're right.
Yeah.
He played over 65 games, made second team All NBA, and there was a point during the regular season where the LA Clippers were considered the top threat to the Denver Nuggets in the Western Conference. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
There was a month stretch where that team was murdering everybody. They were catching hell against just about everybody for a good little minute. And this was one of the most dangerous teams in the Western Conference. And then they kind of just fell off around the time that Kawhi Leonard started getting his little ticky-tack injury where he was off for what I believe the entire last month of the regular season and then into the postseason as well. It just goes to show you that as much like I value his healthiness so much that despite the fact that like he is so good, I had to put him at 11. But he's a guy that I feel like if his health wasn't so much of a concern,
He's a
he
top
could
five
be as
guy.
he could be as high as top 5. That's how crazy it is for me to feel almost out of pocket for putting him at 11, but I weigh his injury concerns so much that I have to put him down there because I feel like still elevating him to the top 5, top 6 is doing a disservice to the fact that he has not been able to consistently perform either during the regular season and dang sure not during the postseason the last 2 to 3 years in terms of just being available, let alone playing at a high level.
Yeah. And honestly, like, and you're going to see on my list too, availability is huge for me. Being called a superstar means being there on the court when your team needs you the most. And Kawhi just hasn't been that for the Clippers over the last couple of years. So in many cases, I would have him like near the top 10. The fact that I have him in 16 is just like, kind of like I've reached my breaking point with him where it's like, man, you're just not there when like you get to show off your superstar ability. And trust me, I know it. You see that freaking banner behind me? I've seen that firsthand.
Right.
So it just hurts me that I'm not able to see this on the basketball court. So I have to put him down my list, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah, for me and Devin Booker, I think what really like ultimately kind of has been like just outside the top 10 for me. It was kind of his transition to point guard. It wasn't as smooth as a lot of people want to make it to be. He's like, oh, they got rid of Chris Paul. Oh, Devin Booker can smoothly go into that. It really wasn't the case. He was still a fantastic player. Like he started off, he had an early season injury, but he was able to come back, still put up his Golly type numbers. But he just didn't feel comfortable in that point guard position, and that's what honestly hurt the Suns coming into the playoffs and why they were swept by the Timberwolves eventually. So I think that Devin Booker. Again, you can really like interchange him as well with my number 10. I was like kind of debating between both, but I do think he's still like a phenomenal player. If you put him against other shooting guards, he probably is the best shooting guard in the league. I just think that like him playing like in the system right now with the Phoenix Suns, it's just not really like you're getting the best out of Devin Booker, and we know what that best can look like.
I do think that's more of a positional fit thing more than individual value. So I think that might be one of those things where maybe you're playing too much into what the Phoenix Suns system is. We do have to remember that was the first year, A, of him having to play kind of full-time point guard, B, playing next to two guys as ball dominant as he is, if not more ball dominant. Now, granted, KD can operate with the ball without the ball a lot better, but the entire offensive flow played within a mid-range area, which is where he thrives the best at. So you can make an argument across the board that besides just the position translation of going from from shooting guard to point guard, there's also a field of opportunity within that roster that he was not able to thrive into, I think, to the best of his ability. When you look at the fact that two of the other most dynamic scorers, not just on his team, but in the NBA, both operate within the same studio area. Space. Yeah. So we'll get to Devin Booker because he is going to come up later in this podcast. But I think that comes down to where our criteria is. And I don't know if before you go into the top 10, do you want to maybe share what your criteria for your top 10 was? I share my criteria, or do you think it's something you'll kind of share along the way?
I could kind of like quickly go through it where it's like I value a lot of playoff success. I feel like your contribution to that playoff success is massive in terms of my list. Being able to be on the floor, you'll see kind of like in my list as well. If your talent can be like top 2, top 3 in the league. But if you're not able to showcase on the floor on a regular basis or do it in like the grander stages, like in like deeper into the playoffs, I put that against you. Maybe it's your team, but of course, like you're the leader of the team. You're going to be the number 1 guy, which is a case of a lot of these guys on the list. The onus is going to be put on you.
Yeah.
The onus will be put on you. So that might hurt you in certain situations as well. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this list goes. But we'll go. But what about you quickly before you go into yours? And before we go to
I think my criteria for the top 10 list is this simple. First off is regular season contribution. I think if you're not if you can't be considered as a top 10 player if you do not have the ability to raise your team's floor in the regular season where you are at least a postseason team every single time that you finish a season. If you are one of those teams that is unable to cap out at least as a postseason caliber team, I think that already puts you in a weird transition. That'll hilariously come up like the minute we start this part of the pod, because there's a guy who I think might to an extent be an exception to the rule. But let's put it this way. My criteria goes as simple as your ability to uplift your team throughout the regular season, postseason performance, availability both in the postseason and in the regular season, and then it comes down to individual talent. I tried to factor in these players as if I dropped in these top 10 players onto any random team, would they fit? How do they fit? And how does that produce, as opposed to going about it strictly within the frameworks of their current situation? Because you have certain teams that are not very good at team building. You have certain teams that are very top heavy, which kind of limits the overall productivity at the bottom of the roster. And then you also have the other aspect of just fit within that superstar. That superstar's play style can also dictate the ability of the team around him, not just in terms of the players and how they produce, but the kind of players you're even able to put around that guy. So portability is also another thing that I think is super important for me, because as much as I think it's cool to judge a player based off of how they're able to produce on the team they currently play on, being a top 10 player in my eyes means I can drop you on any roster. And I'm not saying it means you're a 50-win team, but I think if you're a top 10 player, I think that means you make the postseason every year if I drop you on that roster.
Fair enough. So this is going to be a very interesting list. So we're going to start off at number 10, Jay. Let's get right into this list.
Yeah.
Who do you have at number 10?
So on number 10 is actually a guy that you had in your next, in your next 5 group. And he's a guy that I'm sorry, until something happens differently, I have to keep him within this range. I put LeBron James just barely at my number 10. And I think that this is one of those aspects where it's funny. It kind of builds off of what I just said about dropping a player onto any random team and how does that influence the productivity moving forward. LeBron James at age 39 was still an all-NBA caliber player across the board. He was a guy that still had a decent bed of health this past season, despite having significant injury issues the last 2 to 3 seasons prior. And he's a guy that still, although does not give it to you necessarily as much on the defensive end, he is still one of the best offensive players in the NBA to date. He also just had one of his best 3-point shooting seasons of recent memory, which is something that still gives him a lot of dynamism, when you also factor in that he still somehow at age 39 is one of the best elite athletes in the NBA. I think that LeBron James is one of those guys that still, even at 39, can give you 21, 8 and 8, 23, 8 and 7, just off of playing the mental game of being able to facilitate an offense and give you certain aspects on defense when needed. And the thing that comes down with LeBron James, and I think all of us have felt for this beforehand, is yes, he has definitely taken it easier during the regular season. And that is something that obviously has shown. But he's still been an all-NBA caliber player throughout the regular season. And we still do understand that when it comes to postseason basketball, he has another gear. And that's something that still, even other players that we might discuss on this top 10 list, even some of them don't have that other gear when the postseason hits that he still has showed us. And I haven't seen anything different as of late. I know they had a rough patch this past season, but I'm just saying he's still one of the best players in the NBA. I can't fall off just yet.
Oh no, 100% too. And if you've watched my video, I have him at 13, so it's not too far off from the top 10. So I think that LeBron James, again, he still has that ability to not only, now that his body's, he's turning 30, he's turning 40 years old later on this year, but he could still beat you in so many ways just by knowing the game of basketball, like on every aspect. You heard it on the freaking that short-lived podcast with him and JJ Redick. Unfortunately, that's gone now. But I mean, you can hear how the way his mind works, and he's still to this day, even this past season, 26, 7 and 8, he's still putting up LeBron-esque numbers at this age. We've never seen someone go late into this career and be this good of a player, and he still takes it to the next level in the postseason, like you mentioned. So he still has that ability. Does he have 2016 Cavs ability where he can literally backpack a team all the way to the finals? No. But he still can be considered a number 1A, 1B, and still go far into playoffs, potentially a finals contender. The Lakers still need to do a better job building the rest of the team. But LeBron James, there's no fault to LeBron James in there. He's still a phenomenal player. Having him in your top 10, I don't hate it.
Right. Okay.
Going into my number 10, though. At my number 10, you could call it recency bias if you want. Okay. I have Jalen Brunson at number 10.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. Okay.
My biggest question mark for Jalen Brunson going into the playoffs was, we know how amazing he was in the regular season. 28, 6, and being one of the best, arguably a top 3 point guard in the league this year. People were making arguments that he should be all NBA first team this year. That's how good he was playing in the regular season.
Yeah.
But what would happen when you need to make a deep playoff run? And bro, when he got to that level, and we saw him cook the Philadelphia 76ers. On the time he was on the court against the Indiana Pacers, he was still cooking them. His ability, we didn't think that Jalen Brunson had takeover ability come playoff time. And I mean, this is a whole thing with me saying the top 10 best players in the league right now. Yeah. If I want to have one of the 3 point guards I would want in my team at any point right now is Jalen Brunson. He has the toughness, he has the tough shot making ability, is able to get his other teammates open, be a consistent 3-point shooter himself, get into the lane. This guy can freaking back you down and get into the paint with ease. It feels like for someone who's freaking 6 feet. He has such a great all-around point guard game, and I didn't think we saw this ability in previous seasons, but this year he has put himself into that sort of conversation. And the fact that he's getting paid what he's getting paid in over the next few years seems freaking criminal for the type of player he's going to be going forward. Jalen Brunson, for me, has just edged it where he could be a top 10 player in the league right now.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think there's a little bit of recency bias along with that, just out of the fact that he just performed so well this season. And I think the stand-up guy aspect of him obviously helps as well when you talk about building a team. I just wonder if now this might be one of those things where I might have it messed up in terms of factoring in his actual position with the Knicks a little bit too much. But I think one of the biggest things that was a little bit of a turnoff for me in terms of putting Jalen Brunson in the top 10 is that I think that offense has to run directly through him in order for the team to be successful. I think one of the biggest things that hurt the New York Knicks during the postseason run was it felt like when he had off games, they really struggled to create offense. There's a reason why we're still having conversations where even with Mikal Bridges, even with OG Anunoby, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, we're still having people say, but dang, they might still need Julius Randle as a secondary shot creator because they don't really have anybody who initiates self-generated offense as much past Jalen Brunson. So I think it's one of those things where, yes, I think maybe I might be using the New York Knicks infrastructure as a detriment too much. I think Jalen Brunson is worthy of still being considered in the top 15, no further than the top 20. But I think that the biggest thing that hurts Jalen Brunson in my regard is I feel like in order for him to be extremely successful, it has to be mainly through the ball running through him offensively. That offense for the New York Knicks just seemed to get significantly stagnant during games where he was not able to put the ball in the basket at a high rate. It just seemed like everything slowed. When he does not play well in terms of putting the ball in the basket, it feels like everything for the offense slows down significantly. And I think that's something that really hurts him because if he can't carry an offense on a night-to-night basis, that Knicks team is super vulnerable. If we're still talking about Julius Randle having as much value as he might still have to that Knicks team, even after the kind of offseason they had in terms of building out a deeper roster, that goes to show you just how dependent they are on Jalen Brunson. And I think if I'm building a roster out, I don't want to be as dependent on my point guard to that level.
But here's the thing, though, and this is like, and it's funny because like he was a part of this team. But when you look at the Dallas Mavericks, can't you kind of make the same sort? I mean, now with Kyrie Irving, maybe it's a little bit different. But like for the Mavericks, for the longest years, we still consider Luka Doncic as like a top 5 player in the league when literally he was the system. I think having Jalen Brunson like as like the system there, like in like New York, if there was like some sort of struggle in the playoffs, where if it was like going through Jalen Brunson is fine, but he's proven that he's able to carry the load if the other guys are hitting their shots, and like I mean he's not getting picked on defense. Like they have an elite defense around him, and he has proven that he can compete with some of the top stars in the league in terms of on an offensive basis. I mean, for the longest time he was like the leading scorer in the playoffs, and the Knicks were winning. Like if honestly, if you really think about it, if the Knicks were healthy, they maybe would give the Celtics a run for their money in the conference finals. And I think Jalen Brunson is being the hub of that with like the rest of the guys around him. Like he makes the other guys better in my opinion. I consider him, especially at this moment, a top 10 player.
I think it's interesting that you use the Luka Doncic dynamic because there is a certain similarity. The only thing I would say is a big disparity, and it's the reason why I'm sure you have Luka way higher than you have Jalen Brunson, is because at the end of the day, elite shot making is one of the things that they both thrive at, but I think Luka Doncic plays a much more valuable position in terms of being able to create space and create offense for himself. Number two is we know who the better facilitator is, and it not only stands within the assist numbers, but let's look at some of the guys that Luka Doncic played with just this season and their improved 3-point shooting numbers. Derrick Jones Jr. didn't do that for me with the Chicago Bulls. He definitely didn't. PJ Washington was not hitting the 3 ball at that kind of clip with the Charlotte Hornets, right?
Dante DiVincenzo's like the top 5 shooter this year.
Now, I think that's a fair point, but do you believe that's created off of Jalen Brunson, or do you think he's become an improved 3-point shooter? Because I think if you look at the numbers, he has slowly improved as a 3-point shooter just off of volume alone, even dating back to his transition with the Milwaukee Bucks and then soon being moved over to Golden State.
Warriors, I feel like that's when we saw like those glimpses. Yeah, but I mean I kind of know what you mean. But I think that Jalen Brunson, you're like people think that you can't win with him as a number 1 guy. I still think that's a possibility. I agree. I think I'm comfortable with that now. Mm-hmm. Now that I see him like in this past postseason, of course I had my question marks before this year, but after this year, I'm comfortable with him being a number 1 guy.
It's funny that we're even like going super deep into this because Jalen Brunson, to me, if Kawhi Leonard, for example, is my first guy off. Like, if you go over like some of the guys that I have like in the next area, would you take a Jalen Brunson over a Paul George? I think I would actually consider that. Would you take Jalen Brunson over Anthony Davis right now? Yeah, I actually do. I think I would take Anthony Davis. Would you take him over some of the other guards that we have real conversations of, like a Tyrese Halliburton or a Donovan Mitchell? Yes. I do, after the way this postseason went. Even though I believe so much in Tyrese Halliburton as an offensive hub, I still think that the ability to pick on him defensively and his lack of assertiveness sometimes kills him in ways that Jalen Brunson thrives because he's so assertive offensively, and he does have a defensive infrastructure where maybe he cannot necessarily guard at an elite level, but he is going to be like
pushover. He's going to
be like Kyle Lowry, not as elite. Yes, I don't want to disrespect Kyle Lowry in that regard either, but you understand there's a bulldog mentality on defense where he at least is able to hold up, as opposed to like Tyrese Halliburton, for example, is treated like a cone, or Donovan Mitchell. I love his offensive ability. We saw him in the postseason struggle against Jalen Suggs defensively in terms of like that series against the Orlando Magic, where Jalen Suggs was actually able to have, I mean, don't get me wrong, Donovan Mitchell had a couple of games, but they were able to relatively contain him within that series, and it's the only reason why it went to 7 games. Versus Jalen Brunson, he does come off as a guy who can be undenied. And that's something that does put you in the top 15 conversation. Mm-hmm. To me, I think Jalen Brunson probably falls somewhere between 12 and 14. But I do think that part of it is because I've seen this movie with recency bias for the small point guard when we did this with Trae Young a few seasons ago. I'm also applying the same logic, where as much as I love Tyrese Halliburton, I have him at 17 right now because I can't let one postseason dictate how I feel about him as a player overall. Jalen Brunson has given us glimpses of all-star potential prior to this year. But this year was the one that had us starting to really have that conversation. I can't throw him in the top 10 when the convo just started. Fine. That would be the only thing. But I think you make great points across the board, though.
Yeah, 100%. No, it's fine. Yeah, this is this is where our list kind of differs. So this is gonna be pretty good. But we'll move on to number 9 now.
Okay.
Jay, who do you have as your 9th best player in the league?
Yeah, another old guard player, man, and a guy who, I think is very synonymous with the LeBron James era, hilarious enough. This is where I'm going to put Steph Curry here. And for some people, this might be considered a little low with some of the other guards that might come up. And not that there's many, but with some of the other guards that are going to come above Steph Curry, this might come to a bit of a shock that he's at 9. But pull up the stats. Steph Curry has regressed significantly on offense in every spectrum since that championship year. Since that championship year, he has taken a significant step back as an offensive generator. He's playing less minutes. He's shooting the 3 ball less in terms of efficiency wise, which is one of the biggest things that separates him. Offensive creation wise, I think the Golden State Warriors ecosystem has kind of hurt him to a certain circumstance because he really is the only one that it feels like some nights he's the only one that can dribble, which is kind of crazy when you think about their team once upon a time being associated with ball movement and stuff like that for so long. But it's come to the point now where this isn't to the same degree as where I view Jalen Brunson. It's definitely still about a notch above that in my eyes. But I do kind of worry whether or not Steph Curry can be the best player on a championship caliber team at this rate now. How many times do you see a 36-year-old guard still as one of the best players on a championship caliber team? It doesn't happen often. And when you're an undersized guard, now granted, he has an ability that a lot of undersized guards of yesteryear do not have, which is the ability to shoot the ball from the minute he steps into the stadium. That's something that separates him, obviously. But we've seen a bit of a small regression, which does take it where if we're talking about Stephen Curry from 2 years ago, this is a guy who's in the conversation for being in the top 2, top 3 on this list. But 2 seasons later, there's been a significant regression where I just don't think, kind of similar to LeBron James in a lesser degree, I don't think people fear Steph Curry as an offensive threat to the degree that we've seen in the past. I genuinely view that. And you can see it based off of his efficiency, his inability to create at the same level that he was before. And this is all understandable. He's 36 years old. Like, it happens regression happens to the best of players. There's another player that's a little bit further up this list, but not by much, that I also think is kind of hurt by the age dynamic of just not being feared as an offensive creator as much because of the fact that the separation isn't the same. The offensive generation isn't the same. Steph Curry is still a top 10 player, but we've seen Steph in many different forms, and this has to be probably one of the lower ones.
Interesting thing. I mean, like, I'm gonna talk about Steph Curry later on this list. I'll put it out there.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but I do think that you're still kind of downplaying like his pull he brings on the basketball court, because I still think he's one of the most feared players in the league, and I'm gonna get more into that one into later on to my list.
That's still one side of the ball. That's still, to me, that's one side of the ball. I think Steph Curry is much easier to pick on defensively than he was in years past. That's another thing that's really hurt him, is like when you go further up this list, positional value, it starts to become much more, because I value two-way play. And that might be another thing that's significantly more important, is that Steph Curry to me has become much more of a dynamic one-way player. I'm not going to put him in like Damian Lillard territory, because I still think he's a much better defender. But I think when you go up the list, there's only one other player that I think does not count as a two-way player on this list in terms of defensive capability and defensive scalability. And I think that guy is just so dynamic that it doesn't matter that he's not an elite defensive player. Maybe two guys, but there's positional value wise.
I still view Steph Curry in that sort of ilk. And don't you think it's kind of telling that Steph Curry's regression has to deal with Draymond Green having one of the weirdest seasons of his career, Klay Thompson going to have one of the worst seasons of his career, Andrew Wiggins being a complete non-factor, the loss of Jordan Poole. I feel like I don't think it's Steph is the one that's kind of regressing. I feel like the other people around him, and that's impacting Steph.
But do you think? But here's the question. And I'm glad you bring up ecosystem, because I mentioned that beforehand. One of the things that I do try to keep in why I'm willing to have the conversation is I do want to keep in context ecosystem as a part of the impact on how I rank guys. And you make a great point. Andrew Wiggins turned into a pumpkin. We know what happened with Klay Thompson, not just in terms of that one game with the 0 of 10 in a big time game, but just the overall lack of production as an offensive creator last season. Obviously, Draymond Green's problems, we don't really need to go deep into those because half of them don't even have anything to do with basketball. Jordan Poole was once their second best offensive creator in terms of being able to shot generate, and that dude flipped into a pumpkin, and he's not even on the team anymore.
Like, their second most reliable guy this season, you can make the case, was Brennan Pajemski.
I would still say Kuminga, but I think he just had a weird leash.
Kuminga.
Yeah, I think Kuminga might have still been their second most talented player in terms of production. I think just Steve Kerr just had a very weird leash on Kuminga, but I think you make a really good point. This is the only question I would ask, and I think this is still like the most important part to me. And again, I don't know how this applies to everybody, but I think specifically when you look at Steph Curry, age 36, how much better can he improve? Where has he regressed? Where is he still elite? Do you believe that Steph Curry can be the number one option on not just a playoff team, on a championship caliber team moving forward? Yes. I fear that Steph Curry, because of his, I think that we're getting to a point. I think that we're getting to a point where I don't think he can be the best player. I think, can he be a 1B? Can he be a 1B the way we've scripted up the Lakers with LeBron James and Anthony Davis for Lord knows how long? I think there's a dynamic there, but I don't think that Steph Curry can solely be the best player on a championship team anymore. It's the same reason LeBron James is underneath of him. Yeah. I don't think LeBron James as a singular entity can be the best player on a championship team anymore, because we've seen for the last 2 to 3 seasons that he can only lift the tide can only lift so many boats. And with these two guys, for example, especially at their excelled age, I do believe that there is a point that I'm not going to say they capped out, but I think in terms of being able to lead because lead a championship team is not 16 games of the postseason. It's, can you get through 82 games? Can you be a playoff team? Can you then be a home court advantage team? Can you then make it to the conference finals? Then can you make it to the finals? These two teams, ironically, and of course there's another guy who's going to come up in a little bit, but these two teams, ironically, with Golden State and the Lakers, that is a dynamic that they have significantly struggled with, of just getting above the play-in tournament. And it's because I think that these tides can only lift but so many boats.
Yeah, no. I definitely see your point there. I definitely can. I see what you're talking about there. I just think that this Warriors, this era, at least like this, like sporadic cast of the Warriors, has been more like one of the most erratic in the entire league. Like,
that's a good point.
I think it's just like too much. I feel like there's too much chaos there.
Yeah.
Like that, like even the great Steph Curry, you can't even overcome sort of that type of thing, because there's just too many factors going against you. I still think he's a championship level guy. I still think he could be the number one guy on the championship team, but that's just me. Again, this is like it. But I will talk about him later on the list. Okay. Me at number 9. I think you were hitting at this guy a bit earlier, but this is where I have him. I have KD. This is where I have Kevin Durant.
Little bit higher up, but yes, that's basically that's the only other, to me, that's the only other old guard guy I have left in terms of guys that I think we have synonymous with postseason play and things like that. Yeah. He's the last guy in terms of that guard for me.
Okay, because here's the thing about Kevin Durant, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know what he is. A 7-foot demon that can score on all 3 levels of the court, and you can't stop it.
Yes.
You can't stop it.
Yes.
But can he be a number one guy on the championship team? No. Not number one guy on the championship team. I never thought he, like, with the way he, like, went about things, I never thought he could be like that. But his talent kind of superseded that. For me, right now, where I see Kevin Durant is kind of like prime T-Mac. Where you're like,
what? Wait a minute. I don't think that's an insult necessarily. Not at all. But okay. So that's so interesting. So you don't believe that Steph Curry has fallen off to the point of not being the best player on a championship caliber team, but you think that Kevin Durant has?
I never thought that like you need like with KD, and this goes back to the Warriors days. This is we haven't had this conversation on a pod too, which is kind of hilarious.
Yeah, true.
But I always thought it was always Steph Curry's team. You cannot win like a championship with Kevin Durant with this being like with him being like the team where this is Kevin Durant's team. I never thought that you could
Interesting.
you
I
could
think
do that. You could never do it with Kevin Durant. And I think it's more of a personality thing more than anything.
Okay.
But I never really thought that. But Kevin Durant's like talent is undeniable. But what I mean by like Tracy McGrady, where it's like we know what his offensive capability is.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as an older player, you like it's not like Golden State Warrior KD, where he could be like almost like alongside Draymond Green, an anchor of a defense, because you're not asking him of that, but it also like he just doesn't have like he obviously is a lot less tentative, like he's much more tentative because of the Achilles injuries that he's had on defensive end. He doesn't have the same defensive effort. He still will give you that 29-30 a game, but does that translate to like team success? I don't think that would like that's the case here, and I think that's what kind of a Tracy McGrady was at a peak of his powers. He was like a 29-30 point per game scorer, but there's a reason why he never really got out the first round. With Kevin Durant, I think you need to have like a more suited roster to him, and I think he's still kind of in the mindset like I can have 3 stars, and I think that's good enough for me. We saw this past season; they got freaking swept by the Timberwolves. That stuff just doesn't work anymore. Kevin Durant is still the offensive player, but I just don't think that his current ability can like say like this guy's like him being on the team automatically means that you're like a title championship contender, even like someone who's going to be a perennial conference finals contender.
I'm not sure if I agree with that, only because I feel like the most effective skill set that Kevin Durant has actually plays into something that I value probably a lot more than most people is the portability aspect. I think that you can drop Kevin Durant into any basketball team, elite basketball team or not, and he can instantly fit next to any lead guard, any superstar forward. He still have high defensive capability. I'm not going to say, oh, he was the best defensive player on the Phoenix Suns, because that's not a high bar to clear. But at the same time, let's even look back to his time with the Brooklyn Nets, where him and Nicholas Claxton were like a complete dynamic duo as shot blockers around the rim.
Yeah.
This is a guy who still has legitimate two-way ability. And when he turns the Jets on, he is a dynamic like rim defender. Now, he's not a guy that steps out in space. That the Andre Iguodala aspect of the three a deep wing, that part does not line up with Kevin Durant. But is he a guy that can still be a good rim defender from the 3-4 spot as a roamer? Yes, he can. And the only thing that I think is a bigger disagreement with you comparing him to T-Mac is the portability aspect. I think there's a shot volume that comes with acquiring a T-Mac. I think that Kevin Durant is a guy that can shot generate within the flow of an offense. And I think that's something that separates him, where a guy like T-Mac fell off to the point that he got to a San Antonio Spurs team that's all about ball movement, but because of his play style, never saw the floor. As opposed to a Kevin Durant, I think he can get to 40 years old and still average 17 points in his sleep because of the way that he goes about getting points.
Oh no, I 100% believe that. This is why I said like this is him like with prime T-Mac. Like this is like where I saw like the best version of T-Mac. Like we never got to see T-Mac lead a team to like a deep playoff run or something like that. Kevin Durant at this point for me is where prime T-Mac was. And honestly, that's a huge compliment to Kevin Durant, because prime Kevin Durant for me like is the best probably 1B in NBA history. Like probably the best 1B. But the thing is with T-Mac is like even at his best, he couldn't lead teams to a deep playoff run. Kevin Durant at this moment, I don't think as a number 1A guy, kind of like how T-Mac was with the Magic or maybe his earlier years with the Houston Rockets. What kind of like take them over the hump. Kevin Durant at this point in his career doesn't do that. Even against even alongside one of the best guards in the league in Devin Booker, alongside a dynamic scorer in Bradley Beal, it just wasn't the case.
I think that's fair. I think it's funny because we both have similar arguments for best player on championship team, just different play style.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things. So I think the part that breaks the tie to me between Kevin Durant and a Stephen Curry at this juncture is positional value.
Okay.
At that point, if we both believe that, let's say we both believe that at best, let's say they're both 1As, right? Let's just say they're both 1As. Let's say let's agree to disagree that maybe they both are capable of being the best player on a championship team. Or let's even say that Steph Curry is your 1A in your regard, and he's your 1B in your regard. But I think the thing that then separates then is if they both are potential number one options in terms of a championship caliber team, the positional value of Kevin Durant being able to scale between 3, 4, and small ball 5 changes the dynamic as opposed to a Steph Curry that can only guard barely up the ladder.
I see
that would be my biggest discrepancy. But I think that's a fun argument though.
Yeah,
considering these are two guys that at one point played on the same team, and like you said beforehand, this was one of those things that like really determined how you viewed the Golden State Warriors. Like, whose team is it? Being one of the biggest questions we always ask.
It's always been Steph's team. I'm not gonna move off that. But yeah, we'll move on to number 8. I like this. I like the way we're rolling with this right now. But Jay, we're gonna move on to our number 8. Who do you have over there?
So this is where I had D-Book. I'm not going to lie. This is where I had Devin Booker. And I know that's just barely over Stephen Curry, but I think this is where, youth value provides opportunity to still develop. One of the biggest things that you had mentioned as one of your notches against Devin Booker was his development within the point guard role. I think that because of his youth and another year within a roster like this one, especially because the Phoenix Suns did fill out a little bit better this offseason compared to last season in terms of just like making the pieces fit. It's not great. It's not great still because they're top heavy as all know what. Yeah, they're still top heavy as I don't know what, but it's still a little bit optimized around him to a lesser degree. But I think another year within this role with hopefully a little bit more health from Bradley Beal specifically, but really within the entire group, because this was a really weird year injury-wise for the top 3 in general. D-Book missed time. Bradley missed significant time. KD had a stretch where he was out for a good little minute. Obviously, health within a trio is always going to be significantly important when you talk about how top-heavy a big 3 team is, right? But I think another year within the point guard role will also be very big for his development because he's a guy who I think already is one of the better, like high volume scoring guards on defense. Like Devin Booker, I think is already like, in my opinion, I think he's the second best shooting guard in the NBA. Now you'll see who the first person is a little bit later on, but I think he's the best shooting guard. I think he's the second best shooting guard in the NBA, and I think it's because he can scale between the 1, 2, and sometimes guard the 3 depending on the sizing of the lineup. He's definitely an offensive shot creator. Still one of the best tough shot makers in the NBA. And again, I think that ability, when you put together his youth, the fact that he has played in the conference finals, the fact that he has played in the NBA finals, that he has played in conference finals, and the fact that he has positioned himself now where he still has that ability to grow, if he can grow within that point guard role, it completely changes how we view him as a player because he already has the scalability to guard 2 to 3 positions. Then we factor in the fact that he's a high volume shooter that is relatively efficient. Now, the 3 ball could be better because hilariously enough, coming out of Kentucky, that was one of the things a lot of people valued. And he actually hasn't been as insane of a 3-point shooter as we all would have thought. But he is a guy that I think is only continuing to develop. And I think as he continues to grow within a point guard role, his on-ball responsibility is going to change how he views the floor, which will make him a better facilitator. We already know how good he is as a scorer. I just think there's so much. Steph Curry, I feel like we understand where Steph Curry is and we see where he is. And that is always going to be elite, but I don't necessarily know where Steph Curry improves at age 36. I think that Devin Booker actually experiencing this new positional change gives him a new range of development that makes it where he could actually be even better. And I think that that's something that's like pretty dangerous when you consider the fact that like he's already so elite offensively.
Oh yeah, no, he's one of the best offensive players in basketball. I am not taking that away from him. I just think that you're not fully optimizing the greatness that is Devin Booker by putting him at the 1 position. I think that like you're kind of like I think like you're not going to get the best out of him. I think if you put him at the 2 as he has been like a natural 2 his entire career, that's where you're going to see him like continue to like get into that kind of zone where it's like potential top 5 guy in the league. I think this is like where like beside Kevin Durant, if you have those 2 guys as your sort of wing players, that's where you're going to fully optimize this Phoenix Suns team. I think that whole Bradley Beal thing kind of just threw a wrench in the whole system.
I agree.
Bradley Beal
trade. I agree.
A true point guard there would do wonders for the Phoenix Suns.
Sign Tyus.
I was just gonna say that. I would feel so much more comfortable about this Phoenix Suns team if they had Tyus Jones rather than Bradley Beal. That's crazy to say, but this is literally like what I just think that. And I hate putting Devin Booker on honorable mention, but I just think that he's not being fully optimized in this system as being the one. Put him back at the 2, get him a point guard, and I promise you, we'll see the best version of Devin Booker. I just don't think that, like, sure he can be better than he was last season at the 1, but we're not going to see the best Devin Booker there. We are not going to see it there.
I feel like you make a really good point. I think there's another part of it where I might just be a Devin Booker optimist in terms of him being able to make the most out of making this position change. It'll be interesting to see a year from now how a year 2 of this big 3 really formulates itself. Year 2 will tell us a lot more about where he actually fits within that dynamic of playing point guard. To me, I'm still leaving open the chance of opportunity that this new studio space of being more on ball from this perspective will open up his game in a way that I think we've seen some of the better players in the NBA kind of grow into as that next step in their game. I understand that there's a lot of players on this list that are elite offensive shot creators. But as we get further up this list, you're going to see the value of passing and the ability to create for others become that much more valuable as you scale up. And that's going to be one of those things that I think if Devin Booker year 2 at point guard can establish, it kind of further vaults him into this sphere. But you're probably more right than I am in terms of where you place him, just if we're talking about where he fits as part of the Phoenix Suns. But I think, again, that portability aspect too, drop him as the 2 guard at any other basketball team. Now, what if we put him as the 2 guard next to Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, Wendell Carter for the Orlando Magic? Completely different dynamic, right?
Yes.
So I think it's one of those things where it completely changes how we view him, whether he's fully optimized or in this chance being given further opportunity on ball. I think the sky is the limit for Devin Booker to me even now, because I think he's so youthful, and this is something else that he gets a chance to open his game with.
100%. Okay, here's my number 8. I don't know how you're gonna feel about this one, because Jalen Brunson was a little bit like caught you off guard.
Yeah.
Bro, I have Anthony Edwards on my number 8.
Okay, so this is funny because we're not too far off, because obviously my number 8 was Kevin Durant. So we kind of already had that conversation about Durant and kind of where he fits in the hierarchy of stuff. Ironically enough, number 8 is obvious. It for me is actually where my best player on a championship team list. Remember where the debate of whether or not they are the best player on a championship team? Number 8 is actually where my list stops. So Durant was the last guy on my top 10 that I figured as there's a debate as to whether or not he can still be the best guy. Anthony Edwards just cracked right above that, because I genuinely
so we have him in the same area.
I believe he's different. I just believe he's different.
He's different.
Bro.
This is good. This is good. We're on the same page with this.
Yeah.
Bro, athletic freak.
Yeah.
Improved 3-point shooting game. The leadership that he has shown this entire season.
Yes.
Whether it's in his demeanor, whether it's his assertiveness on the basketball court.
Yes. When
it comes to big-time moments, big-time games, Anthony Edwards just steps up.
Yes.
And we've seen it in not just this playoffs, but the last couple of playoffs now. He has finally understood where he fits in this Twin Tower system, because remember, that was kind of the situation, that was the kind of struggle that he had to face the previous season. Mm-hmm. He's figured it out. He's finally got it. The only reason why he's slowed down this year is because I've never been to the conference finals before. Oh man, I'm starting to get tired. I haven't been playing this much basketball this late into the season. I think once he finally gets over the hump, gets used to playing playoff basketball, bro, Anthony Edwards can be a number 1 on a championship team easily. Yeah. I think you can put him into, and this is where you talk about where this conversation starts. This is where it starts for me. 8 and above, all these 8 guys are gonna be can be number 1s on championship teams, in my opinion. Anthony Edwards is just him, and I think now that we've seen him, the biggest question for him is how does he fit against with these 2 towers? He can fit, and he can show that he's one of the best players in basketball. I have him at number 8.
I think the biggest thing for Anthony Edwards too is just a two-way ability. I just think the fact that
yes,
the fact that because there's multiple things that get factored into like the overall mystique around Anthony Edwards as a developing young player. First of all, you mentioned it at the top, which is super important. Attitude matters a lot in this range. Top 10 player in the NBA. If there's not a little bit of a mean streak to you, I don't know you right now. Like, that's really how I feel in terms of trying to have this conversation. If there's not a bit of a mean streak to you in terms of your ability to go get a bucket when need be, I don't know you right now. You're not in this top 10 if you're not a guy. I feel like when the clock strikes down in the last 2 minutes, not 30 seconds, not last possession, for 2 minutes, can you give me 5 possessions where we can go win this basketball game? Everybody who's in this top 10 to me is a guy that I feel like can lead me to the promised land in a 2-minute drill, period, point blank. Anthony Edwards is a guy that specifically because of what he's able to do on both sides of the ball, the fact that we were able to see as part of the best defense in the NBA all of last season, the scalability to guard 1, 2, 3, play next to a Jaden McDaniels, play next to a Rudy Gobert, as we mentioned beforehand, play even defensively next to guys like Naz Reid, who kind of like upgraded defensively, just like his defensive tenacity just by playing with an Anthony Edwards. Nickeil Alexander-Walker on the perimeter. Like, there's an infectious personality that shows up, but it shows up on both sides of the ball. And actually, something that's really funny about that is coming into last season, that was one of the biggest things he mentioned was that he needed to improve on, was that he needed to be more influential and more like he needed to be more engaged defensively. And we saw arguably not just his best defensive season to date, we saw the best slew of defensive highlights from a guard in quite a long time in the process.
He's fully optimizing his athleticism on both sides of the floor, and that is scary for the NBA. I don't know if you want to add anything else because he's also your number 7, as you mentioned. I don't know if you want to add anything else or anything, but
I mean, we can kind of just we can kind of just go into him like briefly. I can kind of just go into mine briefly. I had him at number 7 because, like I said, the scalability is huge, athleticism is huge, and again, I think this is another part where again my top 7 also factors in. This is where we talked about this on the podcast long time ago, but you know when those GM surveys come out and they ask like who's the player you would want to build around? We're starting to we're getting into that section of the list where that conversation does come up a little bit about whether or not this is a guy that I would want to start my franchise with. Now, for example, Victor Wembanyama does not make this list because I feel like there's still so much raw about him. Yeah. He's a very talented prospect. I just thought that looping him in the top 10, just lumping him in the top 10 after one season, just felt like ultimate glazing, by the way. Just like it just felt like glazing too much, and I didn't want to do that because I felt like that's just like looking at one season sample size and overthinking the process. But these top 6 to 7 guys are all guys that I feel comfortable starting a franchise with. Now, obviously, health factors into this a little bit, but I think in terms of overall skill set and or dominance and or portability, these guys, this group right here are like franchise starters to me. And remember, I told you my old guard guys are gone. Durant, Steph Curry, LeBron James, the old guard guys are gone. So I don't have these 35 and up guys in my top 6, in my top 7. And that's because I look at, like you said, we're talking about best player today, but that also means if I started a franchise today, who would I trust to spearhead that group? Anthony Edwards, if he's not in your top 5 of guys that you would want to start a franchise with, you've lost your mind. Now, top 7 of all talents in general, we can have a conversation about that. Obviously, you had him at 8. But like at the same time, if we're talking about starting a franchise, if he's not one of the first 5 young guys you name off your list, you're just not watching the basketball games that I'm watching.
He's absolutely insane. I'm glad that we're kind of on the same wavelength with that because he's incredible. Maybe people would say, this might be a bit too early, but I'm like, no, he's shown that he's like, that his leadership, his like assertiveness on both sides of the floor, his ability to kind of uplift the rest of his team is like so apparent. And I think the Timberwolves have a good one going forward for many years to come. But I get to go on to my number 7. Like we got through that your number 7 really quickly, but my number 7 might be low to some. I got Joel Embiid right here in my top 7.
Wow. What's funny about that, TV? I'm not even mad at it. I'm not even, because I had this same debate. I'm not even mad at it.
I have. He is a top 3 player in basketball if he's on the court, and that's the problem. This is the problem. We always have a Joel Embiid. This is what we problem when we talked about him in the MVP race last year. This is the same problem we had this year. He played 33 games. He was questionable going into the playoffs. Joel Embiid is the top 3 talent, and we know that because before his injury, he was the clear-cut MVP. Joel Embiid is an amazing player, defensive player of the year candidate if he's on the floor. He's dominant side, amazing free throw shooter. Some people might say he foul baits a lot. I mean, if you're watching the Olympic Games, he's trying to foul bait there, but it's not working. But at the same time, Joel Embiid is an incredible player, and we know that. But there's a reason why his team hasn't made it past the second round. There's a reason why people don't want to put him in the same ilk as some of these other guys, just because he just can't be on the floor. And this is where I have, when I talked about Kawhi Leonard not being, near my top 10, I have him at number 17. When we talk about Joel Embiid not being in my top 5, being a superstar means being there for your team on the court when things matter the most. And I think Joel Embiid has consistently proved that he is not able to do that. His ability is all world, but he's just not able to be on the court and produce and uplift this team when it matters the most. But he's just so good of a basketball player that you can even make the argument that his talent is number 1. That's how good he is on the basketball court on both sides of the ball. We talk about both sides of the ball. He has a huge impact on both.
Yeah.
But he's just not on the court enough. I have to put him at number 7 here.
So I want to make one comment real quick first. Is I actually had a miscount, which is hilarious enough. I didn't realize that I had these guys linked in a tier. LeBron James and LeBron James and Steph Curry were in a tier. I had I have lines and stuff on this stuff. So actually they were kind of tied as my number 10.
Ooh, okay.
Didn't really realize that. So I mean, it doesn't really separate where I view on them just because. Like I said, it was like a tier list. That's number 1. Number 2 is so Anthony Edwards actually on my list would have been 7, just like you. It's basically where I was.
Number 8.
You had him at number 8. I had him at number 7 still. So it still kind of lines up, but I just kind of mistiered those 2 guys. I think it's because I kind of had them lumped together as part of that little grouping. Nonetheless, let's get back to Embiid real quick. It's funny that you had Embiid where you had him at because I struggled with the idea of whether or not I had Embiid too high or if I actually needed to move him lower. And it's simply because the injury history has become so prolonged that it feels as though we almost do not have a full scale of what a Joel Embiid full season looks like.
We don't know what it looks like.
To the point, and you know what? You're right. Not it feels like. We do not know what a full-scale Joel Embiid front-to-back NBA season looks like, to the point that we are not sure whether or not his dominance is sustainable or if he just simply will be forever tagged as the per-minute MVP. Right? Because that's the debate we always have every single season. If he plays 55 games, for 55 games, he's going to be the lead MVP front runner. That's one of the things that we always have a conversation about. He's always going to be in the top 3 to top 5 of MVP conversation for the 55 games that he plays. But what about the entirety of the season? What about that remaining 27 games or so that are left there that he doesn't play, that leaves all of this open opportunity for us to question his durability, to question whether or not he can lead a team to a championship, to question whether or not he is the best player at his position versus Nikola Jokic. He always kind of leaves this space for us to question his overall value as one of the best players in the NBA. He always leaves that space of mystery because he always, at the most inopportune times, by hook or crook, finds a way to not just miss time, but miss time for a long time.
And at the worst time.
And at the worst, good point. Yeah. So full transparency, because I obviously have him on this list. I had him just at 5. And it's because at the end of the day, this is a guy who won MVP, has been top 2 in the MVP front runner, top 2 in the MVP race 3 of the last 4 years, basically, or somewhere like 4 of the last 5 years, something of that dynamic.
Yeah.
I think that at the end of the day, the dominance we see when on floor, it supersedes the injuries to a certain degree. For me personally, because again, I weigh injuries a lot heavier than maybe certain people do, but this is one of those things where Kawhi Leonard was one of my first guys off, right? And I mentioned that injuries was a concern that took him out of the top 5 and dropped him all the way down to 11. For me, Embiid could have been number 2. And I dropped him down to 5 because I feel as though the MVP dominance, Kawhi Leonard does not have MVP dominance. He does not have MVP dominance. Joel Embiid does. And that's why I think the difference between 2 and 5 to me, when you talk about MVP, is equivalent to a guy who is an all-star caliber, all-NBA caliber player dropping from 5 to 11. Because there's a gear that you have to hit to be considered the best player or considered the top 3 player in the NBA. And I don't think that Kawhi Leonard has hit that gear in a long time. Joel Embiid has hit that gear in some semblance.
Spurts.
In some semblance for the last 4 to 5 years. And that's something that I feel like, yes, he's still a top 5 player for me, but he should be higher than that. And that's actually the biggest disservice.
Yeah, bro. I mean, like, you say you, like, weigh injuries a lot. Yeah, as you can tell by my list, I weigh injuries.
Yeah.
Especially consistent injuries a lot, especially at the worst opportune times. And Joel Embiid being at number 7, Kawhi, like I mentioned, being at number 17, kind of shows that. And you know I love Kawhi. I've mentioned that already. But, okay, let's move on from Joel Embiid. Where are we on your list? So you had Anthony Edwards at number 7, right?
Yeah, Anthony Edwards was number 7.
Okay, so we're moving on to your number 6. Who do you have there at number 6?
Number 6 was Jason Tatum. That's where I finally slotted him at. And personally, I think some people might move him up. Some people might move him down. I do not think that this postseason run told me a lot about Jason Tatum as a number 1 option. I just don't think it did. I think that when you have a fully optimized roster, Derek White, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, like when you have the overall productivity across the board that he had, I don't think we learned a lot about him as a number 1 option. I think the way that the postseason ended was an even bigger indicator of that, because I think, just as the people who voted Jaylen Brown as finals MVP did as well, I think you can make an argument that Jaylen Brown was the most consistent Celtic throughout the entirety of the postseason, which I think when you talk about your best player on a championship team, consistency is an important factor as well as the talent that they provide. Jason Tatum to me is just a elite level utility player. Elite level utility player. I think he's a guy that you can put on any team. I think he can be your best player on a championship team. That's why he's still number 6 for me, is because I still think the skill set, the build, the positional value, the overall ability that it provides on both sides of the ball gives me the belief that he's still a top player in the NBA, that he is still a top option for a championship caliber team. But despite just coming off of a championship, I can't move you past 6 in my eyes, because I have not seen the gear that solidifies that take. I've always viewed Jason Tatum as a top 10 player, at least over the last 4 to 5 seasons.
Same
in
here.
terms of,
yeah. Same
I
here.
think that's the case, but I don't think that I can vault him into the top 5 when I don't feel like I've had a strong enough sample size of consistency as a number 1 option on a team that I think is a legitimate threat to win a championship. Every single time that the Celtics have made a long, significant run, Jason Tatum has had these weird ebbs and flows where we have the Jason Tatum game, but then we have the weird off-night shooting games where he's not aggressive or he's completely shut off. That's not what you want. That's not what you're looking for in a guy who's going to be your number 1 option. But then he has those games like game 6 against the Miami Heat some years ago, or I think it was game 5 against Golden State in the championship year of where Golden State won the championship. Like, there are games where Jason Tatum just makes you feel like, yo, who's going to stop this guy? And then there's other games that just make you wonder, like, wait, is he going to show up? And I think that's the biggest difference between being an all-star player that can crack the top 5 and being an all-star player that's always going to be 6 through 10.
I believe that. Yeah, no, that's good. I completely understand that. I'm gonna get to Jason Tatum a little bit later. Actually, not too much later. Not gonna lie,
Yeah.
but I do believe that Jason Tatum. I think his all around game has improved, and I think like he's become like in previous years we've seen him always try to get into that Tatum mode, the one where like, oh my gosh, Jason Tatum is absolutely unstoppable. He tries too hard to get into that mode, but this past year, him maybe taking a little bit of a step back and maybe like focusing more on the playmaking side of things, making sure that he's letting his offense not dictate his defense, making sure that he's in the right place, like on the defensive end. I think like that improvement has still like made me enjoy Jason Tatum, especially throughout this playoff run, than I have in previous years when he's had more of those Tatum type games. But I know exactly what you mean, and like I think that's where there's like a kind of a gap between maybe the top 4, top 5, and Jason Tatum. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You have that little like extra step in there. So I completely understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
My number 6 though. Yep, I still think that this guy's a top 6 player in the league. Give me Steph Curry.
Oh, of course. I think he was gonna have to. Obviously, it felt like it was about that time because obviously you said he was higher on the list. Okay,
yes.
I mean,
I have Steph Curry here, and I completely understand your points. Is he a number 1 guy in the championship team? There's a conversation to be had. Can he still be, leading this, like, should he still be able to lead this Warriors team to the playoffs? Actually, at this point, I don't know. The Warriors feel as dysfunctional as that right moment. But this is what I get with Stephen Curry. The best 3-point shooter of all time. I can still say he's the best 3-point shooter in the league. I still think that he can elevate the other players on the court offensively because maybe he's not a top-tier playmaker, but he gets so much pull on just being on the court. That it opens up the game for so many others. It's just this year that you got the worst version, like one of the worst versions of Klay Thompson. You had Draymond Green who just didn't want to play basketball. Oh no, Steph Curry's not on the court. I don't want to play basketball. We have Andrew Wiggins having his worst season ever. No more Jordan Poole. But what Steph Curry has, and why I still kind of have him in this sort of realm of talent in the NBA, is that when he's on the court, when you face a Steph Curry team, he is the one guy you have to game plan for the most, in my opinion, out of anyone in the league. Maybe next to Nikola Jokic, but still, Steph Curry is like the number 1 guy you have to game plan against. Because not only do you have to look at what he does on the ball, but you have to keep an eye on him 24/7 when he's off the ball. Because even at the year 36, this man is moving like left to right, side to side, up and down. He's still doing all of that. It's just when you don't have your other guys hitting the shots that they're accustomed to, that just puts more onus on Steph Curry, and more eyes are put on him, more defenders are put on him. Give this guy like, I'm not gonna say that the Mavericks make it to the finals with Steph Curry, but say if you kind of put Luka Doncic, I think will still take the Warriors to the finals. I'm not the finals, but to the playoffs, I'll say. But adding Steph Curry maybe instead of like Luka Doncic there, when you have those guys hitting their shots the way that Luka had those guys hitting their shots, that just opens the game for Steph Curry, and I think that you wouldn't see like better production out of him. It's just that the Warriors have been such in a mess these last couple of years that we're not able to see that. I still think that Steph Curry, because of the gravity he has on the court, because the amount of game planning you have to do for him and like understand all these actions, all of these dribble handoffs, all that, you have to game plan him for him the most. One of the guys in the league, like I still have him in that top 6 tier.
To me, I don't really. Obviously, we talked about Steph Curry a little bit earlier, so I don't want to go like too much deeper into what we've already said. But I think the only thing I would say, and it's not even like a retort against it, actually is kind of like builds on what you're saying, is I hope Steph Curry proves me wrong. Like look, I have him top 10 still. Like I had him and LeBron James. Basically, him and LeBron James, I had at 10. Like I said, I miscounted, but that's how locked in I was with this list that I literally lost track because. Like these, I don't know how I was going to be able to separate these guys from the top 10. Steph Curry being included in that, to me, I hope he proves me wrong, and I hope that you're right, that this is more of ecosystem bias than it is his actual productivity. And I'm willing to admit, as a guy who factors in ecosystem as part of how I organize my list, that there might be a part of this where I have Steph Curry too low just simply off of what I've seen in recent history, the last 2 seasons in particular, right? But I think that there's also a certain element where I don't necessarily think, for example, you mentioned with dropping him in Dallas and other guys hitting their shots. Do they hit their shots with Steph Curry there, or did Luka Doncic help create / generate open opportunities for guys that normally don't hit shots in other environments? That's kind of the different thing that you have to weigh in my mind. But I think with your argument being what it is, Steph Curry can have one really strong season next year, and we could be having a completely different conversation about where he is on the hierarchy. But I think that debate on whether or not he's the best player on the championship team, he has about 1 or 2 more seasons to really prove that before, he hangs it up. So we just have to wait and see.
100%. All right, now we're going into our top 5.
Yeah.
I don't know if we already kind of just discussed your top 5. You have Embiid at your number 5. If you want to go a little bit, if you want to speak on a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, so Embiid was number 5. Like you said, I won't go too deep into it. I think the biggest thing for me was that I feel like we learned a lot more about Embiid as a playmaker for others under Nick Nurse this year. And I think that's an element of his game that we've always really liked. Like for him to be able to tap into more dribble handoff wise, passing out of the post, creating out opportunities instead of just always kind of getting ISO heavy. And he got a little bit better about not getting so happy with the mid-range jump shot this year.
Exactly. Yeah. Just settling for the mid-range jumpers. I like that.
Like this. Yes. In years past, there have been times where Joel Embiid is kind of like you said, settled to that mid-range jump shot, and his efficiency of the mid-range jump shot is something that, especially for the big man position, is definitely elite. But it takes away from the dominant factors of him being this big body physical specimen of a center. That if he takes most big men to the block, he should be walking away with 2 points bare minimum just about every single time if he doesn't get fouled. So I think he was just being able to make better decisions on ball, being more aggressive around the rim, obviously still being not necessarily an elite shot blocker / rim defender, but still, able to really anchor a defense at the center position. And something that I thought was really important in TV, we talked about it during the playoffs actually, was that when Joel Embiid went down with injury, right, and he came back during that postseason. I think it was around game 3 or whatever, game 3, game 4. When Joel Embiid was injured, there was a shift in his game that I brought up during that series that I think during that Knicks series that I think actually is super telling about how much more dangerous Joel Embiid could actually get. When Joel Embiid just got the ball and made a decision instantly, just instead of dribble, think, back down, just gets ball, makes decision. What happens next? It ended with a lot of baskets. I think didn't he get a 50 ball coming off an injury?
I think 50 or just under 50, something like that.
Yeah, it was either just under 50 or it was 50 or it was a 50 ball. I think it might have been game 4, game 3 or game 4. This was coming off of what we thought was going to be a scary injury that might have ended up ending in the series for him, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So that just goes to show that's another element of his game when healthy that could actually be way more dangerous in his arsenal. I've said this about Jason Tatum before too. Jason Tatum, he has a lot of Paul Pierce, Carmelo Anthony in him. Of has to get his triple threat going. Yeah. You know what I mean? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
When those guys like Joel Embiid and Jason Tatum just make a decision when they get the ball, the minute they get the ball, I'm gonna attack down here. The minute I get the ball, I'm gonna put this 3 up. The minute I get the ball, I'm entering the post. They're just so much more dynamic offensively.
Yeah.
So much more dynamic. So I just hope to see more of that from Joel Embiid. But the biggest thing for Joel, like I said, I dropped him at 5, is because of injury. This is a guy who could have been an argument for top 2, top 3. Instead, he's down at number 5 for me. I think there's still so much that he can do, but health is the only thing that unlocks those other things. So we have to see that first before we can really get to the rest of it.
Yeah, 100%. Your place at 5, that's very valid.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to my number 5. This is where I have Jason Tatum.
Okay.
I have Jason Tatum on my list.
Makes sense.
He brings for me everything offensively. Maybe he's not an elite playmaker, but one of the things that I've been like wanting to see Jason Tatum, especially over the past few failed finals runs, is will his shot making on the offensive end affect the way his the other players on the court are, and will it affect his defense? Because it felt like at times, I don't know if you were if you felt this too, but he let it kind of affect him where he was getting more frustrated on the defensive end. He was kind of swiping a bit more, doing all that stuff. I feel like this year more than anything, and there were those little lulls from Jason Tatum. He was very good throughout the playoffs, but there were still those little lulls. But he didn't let that affect him. He was in the same place defensively. There were times in the playoffs where he had to guard fives, not just fours. He had to guard fives, especially with the Kristaps Porzingis injury. He was very solid in those possessions. He was very much more communicative on that end. And then on the offensive end, people were kind of questioning his tunnel vision. Like, we know you're a great scorer, but you try to do that too many times. We know what the best version of Jason Tatum is, but the next step into becoming a superstar is making the correct read, making the correct pass. And I think this year more than ever, we've seen that with Jason Tatum, and we've noticed that earlier on in the season, and that translated to the playoffs. And you could see that with him trusting Derek White more in the postseason, him trusting Jaylen Brown more to make decisions like deeper into the postseason. And you still got those Jason Tatum moments. You still see those times where he's just absolutely unstoppable on the court. That sometimes that step back three when it's falling, it's one of the most prettiest things in basketball, man. That back three from Jason Tatum. You feel like he's become a very an amazing all around player. I don't think he's gone into that gear where you can which I've seen the top 4 guys have gone to in the league, but I still think he's he's right now at that number 5, especially coming off a championship. I have Jason Tatum there.
Like I said, no arguments there. I obviously had him at 6, so I mean we're right there in the same ballpark. He's a guy that I feel like, dude, it feels like this guy's been 19 forever, but it's one of those things where this guy, he's always gonna be in this conversation. I don't know if he'll ever be considered as the best player in the league at any point.
He'll be in this area.
But I think for a majority of his career, he's going to be a guy that we always consider as a top 10 player. And I think there's still another gear he can hopefully hit. I hope that this championship run right here kind of gives him the freedom to play with a little bit more aggression rather than being a little bit more within the team construct. His team is OP. So open up the offense a little bit and kind of just allow yourself to play a little bit freer. Sometimes the championship does that for people. And I hope that next season that works for Jason Tatum, because I think a little bit more of a free-spirited Jason Tatum might actually give us even more on both sides of the ball, which sounds crazy to ask for, but he might actually be able to do it.
100%. I mean, he's still an amazing player. We acknowledge that, but is he gonna be in mentioned the same in that same level as these next 4? I don't know. But Jay, going on to your number 4, who do you have over there?
This is where I put Luka.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Luka Doncic. Okay.
And this might be controversial because I think the top 4, I think everybody kind of knows who the top 4 is just based on the way this list is shaken out. It just depends on what your order is.
Yeah.
Luka had an amazing couple of runs these last postseasons, and obviously this run to the championship was huge, and he was a big contributor of that. He is still one of the most dynamic one-man offenses in the entire league, and I think there's not too many guys that you can scheme for and be successful in the NBA that'll be in this top 10, but Luka Doncic is easily top 3, top 4 most unschemable guys in terms of trying to put together a defense to hold him at bay. He's also a guy that doesn't do well with physicality, which is something that people have used to try to level the playing field with him. And one of the biggest things that hurts Luka Doncic in my regard, to the point that the guy that's above him is the dude that I uplifted, not just because of bias. Of course, we'll get there when we get there, but Luka Doncic has become so much of a defensive liability that it's starting to hurt his credibility to me. I'm going to be honest with you. And by credibility, I mean, I think that Luka Doncic is an elite caliber player and the best player on a championship caliber team. But I feel as though the Dallas Mavericks will always hit a certain ceiling as long as he's a guy who's going to whine on his way back on defense. He's going to be a guy who foul hunts. And he's going to be a guy who does not move much off the ball on offense. We said this about James Harden with the Houston Rockets for years, that we felt like there was a limit to how far the Houston Rockets could go as long as James Harden played this heliocentric play style where, yes, he's an elite passer, so he's going to have a high number of assists. Yes, he's a big body guard, so he's going to be able to grab rebounds. Yes, he is a tough shot maker, which is going to make him a dude who's going to average anywhere between 27 and 32 points a game. Yes, he's a guy who is going to be able to create a ton of offense for you. It's the reason why he's top 4 is because he's such a generational offensive talent that I can't drop him out of the top 5 when I know how dominant he is as a offensive player, both for himself and as a creator for others. I mentioned I mentioned PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. earlier, looking how
career
he's
years,
yeah, in terms of having career years as 3-point shooters. I'll give you a different argument. I know we know where he is, but have you heard from Dorian Finney-Smith since leaving the Dallas Mavericks?
No.
Since
Yeah.
ending up in Brooklyn, he hasn't been the same kind of high commodity 3-and-D wing that we once viewed him as when he was next to Luka Doncic. It goes to show you his value offensively. He is so dynamic offensively that, again, similar to the James Harden arguments, he's always going to be a guy when at the peak of his powers is going to be on this top 5, top 7 conversation because he's just that unstoppable. But the foul hunting, the complaining, the lack of effort on defense, the fact that he plays such a valuable position defensively too, because yes, he plays point guard a lot, but let's be honest, Luka Doncic positionally is a wing. He guards 3s and 4s.
Yeah.
That's not good when some of the best players in the NBA play 3 and 4, mainly 3, but play 3 and small ball 4. So he plays a high positional value position defensively, yet he's so low effort on that side. Now, some would say it's because how significant his offensive role is. I would say, let's look at the postseason. In the small instances where he hiked it up defensively, Jason Kidd questioned his effort on the defensive end. When he would follow up as responding, the team as a whole would respond and play much better. Yeah. Which goes to show you that he has the capability to uplift himself in that regard. Also, we've done this with Embiid, so I'm going to do it with Luka Doncic. There's a lot of seasons we come into the year where we have to ask ourselves whether or not Luka Doncic is in shape. And that's something else too that I'm not going to sit here and hold against him. The man's number 4 on my list. We're nitpicking at this point, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. The man's number 4 on my list. But that is another thing too. Remember I mentioned earlier, this is a section of my list where we start talking about building a team around. Luka Doncic is a guy who I would build my team around, but there are certain characteristics. This is less on the floor and almost like more characteristic based, more intangible based, that hurts his argument to have him higher on this list. Again, the man's number 4, but still,
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really interesting. I'm gonna talk about him again. We're gonna eventually talk about Luka Doncic on my end as well. But I think that him and his kind of ability, I think him actually. This is the way I'm gonna put it. Him losing the finals, I think, is good for him. And I think long term is good for him because he knows what it takes to get there, and now he can look back and to say what were the little things that could have been better in order for me to reach that for the result to be different. He might start looking at the foul baiting. He might start looking at the thing, and maybe he turns that around going forward. So maybe kind of like the same thing how LeBron lost to the Spurs, got freaking humbled by them, getting 4-0 in that 07 series. Thing going with Luka Doncic and these generational players, they have to hit that sort of almost reach the peak of its powers, but then kind of get humbled at the end there. I think this is going to be good for him, and I hopefully that all those little nitpicky things that we have against him, they can improve going on moving forward because they were close. Luka Doncic, again, like we mentioned, is good enough to really take this team, take any team and make him into a finals contender. But can he just fix up on those little things, those little nuances in his leadership role? We'll have to wait and see going forward, but I think we're going to see some changes in the next couple of years with Luka Doncic.
I hope so.
Coming in number 4 for myself, though, it's our guy, a guy that kind of unites the pod together, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Yeah.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's over here at number 4, showing us that he is a unstoppable force on all 3 levels offensively. One of the more underrated guards defensively, in my opinion, in the league. He actually compared to, you have to think about it this way. Him and Tyrese Halliburton are the same height. They're both 6'6" point guards who are great passing, scoring, yada yada yada. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a great point of attack defender. He's able to switch onto other guards because of his 6'6" frame. He's able to guard shooting guards as well, which is really important. And he's shown this year that he's able to take over games in high pressure games and like be able to lead this Thunder team. By the way, who was number 9 last year, all the way up to a top 3 seed in the West, with honestly not too many different changes to the roster. Maybe Chet Holmgren, but they've been able to play around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and him being a top 2 MVP candidate this year. There are people making the argument he could be number 1, but he is just such a great all-around player at an important position in basketball at the point guard position. He's just absolutely elite, and he's going to be in these conversations of top 3 for many years to come. He's that amazing of a basketball player.
Yeah, to me, that's why I had him at number 3, like you mentioned beforehand.
Going with the number 3 argument.
Yeah, like that's why. And of course, we just have these guys interchangeable because I'm sure that you have him at 4. I'm sure Luka's at your number 3. He might be at your number 2, but I'm sure that we have him relatively interchangeable in terms of who we think the best guard in the NBA is. To me, I'm gonna lean with our guy, and one of the main reasons why is because, again, first of all, building a team around a guy. I've mentioned this a lot throughout the podcast, but I've said this throughout many a podcast. This podcast, back on the TV on Basketball podcast, back on the Knockdown J podcast, the Hoop Talk podcast, whatever podcast I've ever hopped on when it comes to talking about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I've always said the same thing. The part that's been the most impressive to me about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander getting to this point is the fact that he is a guy who has seen every phase that there is in the NBA in terms of growing into a superstar, from being a rookie off the bench to being a guy that gets more minutes, to being a third option, to then being the first option, to then escalating to being an all-star caliber player, and then taking that another notch to being the second best player in the league during the regular season this past year. He has taken every step that there is to build what you want in an MVP, best player on a championship team caliber guy. He has taken every step that you want and need to see in order to visualize a guy who might not have been viewed as a number 1 talent coming out of the draft when he came out of Kentucky, but a guy who grew into a guy who now we associate with, in my case, the best guard in basketball. And some people thought going into the postseason they had worries about what he would look like as the number 1 option for the first time as part of a postseason team. Oh, let me read the stats for you. 30.2 points per game, 7.2 rebounds,
no fall off whatsoever,
6.4 assists, 1.7 blocks, 1.3 steals. And in the process, shot 43% from 3 and just under 50% from the field. Yeah, that's the guy. That's the guy who was that was the guy who was 1 foul away from potentially sending the Dallas Mavericks to a game 7 that would have been in Oklahoma City, which could have potentially changed the entire dynamic of the way the Western Conference played out. That's the guy we just saw in the postseason just a few months ago. Yeah, that's the guy who many people say going into the postseason, is he a little too reliant on foul drawing to be able to get to that 30-point per game mark that he got during the regular season? No. The game got more physical during the postseason and still averaged, like you said, no fall off, still averaged about 30 points per game. Like, this is a guy who gives you everything, does it on both sides of the ball, plays a premium position offensively, guards well against one of the more premium positions, being on-ball point guard. I think the fact that he's such an elite perimeter defender, matched with the fact that he plays passing lanes so well, opens up so much for him. And let's be honest, this 5-out style that the Oklahoma City Thunder are trying to play, it starts with the overall ability of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, not only with his ability to shoot the ball, obviously at the point guard position, but this man touches the paint about 2-3 times per possession. Yes. This guy creates open opportunities on the wings for players because of the fact that he gets so many paint touches as a guard. He's like the slippery version of like prime Derrick Rose. Remember how Derrick Rose kind of just used to always muscle his way to the basket, and it created so much of like a crash down that it created opportunities for a Ronnie Brewer, a Luol Deng, and others to be able to shoot the ball from the outside. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does that in a much more finesse, slippery way, where it seems like he's able to get to the basket at will. And when he has 3-point shooters to spray out to, it makes the offense around him that much more dynamic. I think, again, there's a bias. You mentioned it at the top of this section. There is a little bit of a bias, but in my personal opinion, I've probably been on this bandwagon for a long time as it is, but I think he only further solidified it for me this year. To me, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the best guard in basketball. Both sides of the floor included, 30-point per game scorer, a guy who can pass the ball, plays on both sides of the ball, and a guy that like literally you factored in things like character, like when we talked about Anthony Edwards, for example, he's also a guy that although he doesn't have the charisma per se, at least outwardly, that Anthony Edwards has, listen to the way he talks about his team. Look at the way he talks about the way the Oklahoma City Thunder have built around him. Let's also look at the way that he's made the process for himself to get to this point. They're all traits that I would want in a guy that I consider as one of the best players in the league.
Also, the way he's able to take responsibility, like,
Yes,
in all situations. He has being a superstar down pat. Let's say that he has it down pat. Yeah. But yeah, I had him at number 4. My number 3. You mentioned it earlier, Luka Doncic. Yeah, it's I think what sucks about Luka and what hurts him is that this guy was all NBA first team in his second season. So we have such a high barometer for how great Luka Doncic can be that any little like misstep or literally like any little mistake is like extra like magnified in terms of Luka Doncic. But he has been able year after year after year come up and like absolutely like blow through expectations or meet expectations. And this year he finally made it to the finals. And look, this is the path of every superstar level player, every all-time great. Actually, more every type of generational type player, where you finally feel like you reached the pinnacle, you hit that wall. For Michael Jordan, it was those freaking bad boy Pistons. For LeBron James, it was the Spurs / the Boston Celtics. And now for the Luka Doncic, it was the Clippers, and now it's the Boston Celtics in the finals. He needs to have these type of moments in order for him to grow in the future, because we already know how great of an offensive player he is. He's a triple-double threat every single night. He is an offense unto himself, and it actually works out on the basketball court. Yes. We can't say that about many players, where he could be an offense onto himself. He can elevate others, but it could still be as effective because he's still probably going to be a top 3 scorer in the league every single season. You can't say that about many players, and Luka Doncic is able to do that. Maybe there's too much like onus on that. That's why he kind of like slows down later on to like into the playoffs. But at the same time, the same thing I said about Anthony Edwards, same thing I'm gonna say about Luka Doncic. This loss is gonna help him because he's gonna know how to condition himself better. He's gonna look at the little things that kind of maybe swung the series in terms of this and against the Celtics. Hopefully, he learns from those little mistakes and understands what it takes to be the next step in order to be crowned an NBA champion. We know how great he is as a player. It's just about those little tiny mistakes as a leader, as an on-court leader, that he needs to kind of fix up, but we know that he has the ability to do it. So we know how great he could be. I still think he's like a top 3 player in basketball. I won't put him at number 2, but I'll put him at number 3.
I mean, like you said, we're not that far off. Our top 4 is pretty similar as it is. Luka Doncic, it's splitting hairs, obviously. Like I said, there's a certain bias with Shai that moved him towards 3. Luka Doncic, I see all your arguments for him as well. And like I said, like you said beforehand, there is a nitpicking element with generational talents to the point that although he is the guy we know he is offensively, we nitpick at what he is defensively. We nitpick at what he is.
Because we want him to be the number 1 guy. Because we expect him to be the number 1 guy eventually. Yes. So that's what I mean. It comes with it, and I think he understands that. But now that he's got that loss under his belt, this is the next step where he's like, okay, what can I work on to make sure that next time I'm in a situation, I'm gonna be coming out the other side. Yeah. So yeah, Luka Doncic is my number 3. I have a feeling our number 2 and number 1 are, especially with the way that I think our 2 and our 1, I think we might have. Who knows? It actually could be flipping around. Let's see. But Jay, who do you have at your number 2?
Giannis.
Okay, I'll say this right now. I have Giannis at number 2 as well.
Yeah. I figured by this point. I figured by this point when we got to the top 4, like I understood who the names were, and I didn't think that we were gonna divert too much. The Shai Luka thing wasn't even like that big of a discrepancy to me. Yeah. But I mean, Giannis is just a two-way force. He's a guy who creates offense for himself in a way that's not like the bag work way that people tend to associate with creating offense for yourself. Tween, dribble, jump shots, all that great stuff. He doesn't do all of that, but he's literally a downhill threat. He creates an offense to himself that forces defense to have to crash the paint, have to crash the glass to avoid offensive rebounds, to avoid his ability to just get to the rim at will. He's become a much better passer over the years, and they've been able to optimize that by getting three-point shooters, getting a guy like Brook Lopez, who has been able to stretch the floor, getting a guy like Damian Lillard, who they weren't able to optimize to the ability that they wanted last season. But I think with a healthier year, with a full off season with Damian Lillard, they're going to be a dynamic team next year. Talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, Chris Middleton was injured, hobbled throughout the season last year, but we saw that he still is a significant threat, and he's another guy that Giannis is able to rely on in terms of being able to kick the ball out to. Like Giannis just does a lot of the little things well, but he's a dude that does it in a way that he walks into 25, 10, and 8 or 25, 8, or 25, 8, and 7, because he's a dude that just like with his physicality paired with the fact that he's just he's not elite at it, but he is a great decision maker with the basketball. He's just a walking like wrecking ball that also just knows what he's doing in the process. Usually when we associate players with like like the wrecking ball association, we kind of view it more as like bull in china shop, right?
Yeah.
Guy who like can game wreck, but it's almost in this kind of like erratic way.
But Giannis is calculated.
Yes, it's a calculated destruction, like calculated version of destructive play, and that's something
to his madness. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That makes him just so much more unique in terms of what he's able to do, and then that doesn't even count for what he is on the defensive end. Yes, I think he took a step back defensively last year. I also think the Milwaukee Bucks in general just took a very weird step back last year when you look at the fact that they got a Malik Beasley last year, but it was right before they got Damian Lillard, who they probably wouldn't have acquired Malik Beasley considering the makeup of the backcourt had they known Damian Lillard was coming down the pipeline. Also, I think that it was a weird dynamic with the fact that like Chris Middleton had missed so much time because he was coming off of an injury that, he had surgery coming into last season. Like there were so many different, don't even get me started on the whole coaching situation, which obviously made things a little bit difficult as well. But I still think that Giannis like has DPOY potential in any given season. And like the fact that he can be a DPOY candidate and still be a dude that averages like 29 and 10 is like insane that he still has that capability. And I think funny enough, Giannis might not be a shooter, but I think he's a guy that with his physicality, there's a point where I think I said this back on our best players in 2028 episode a long time ago. I think he's a guy that might be able to prolong his career by just playing by being able to play center. Yeah. And that's something that I also think is pretty elite because the fact that he can scale down to being able to just play like rim running center, it makes a dude who's just a hyper athlete who that hyper athlete archetype tends to fall off around like early 30s. Giannis's athleticism paired with the fact that plays the big man position, it could just maybe be like a big time shot blocker. He's a dude who might be able to prolong his career out of the fact that he could just move over to the center position and maybe play more of a defensive role.
Yeah. I mean, you said it all there. I mean, I don't even think he took a step back defensively, not gonna lie. I just think that like this is the problem with the Bucks, like just like sticking like too old in my opinion. Like you're letting all like this roster age out, and when you want to get guys that are sticking more to Giannis's timeline. Giannis is the ultimate two-way guy, and I don't think we've seen anyone as physically dominant as this guy probably since Shaq. As like physically dominant, and this is like he's someone like you mentioned, bull in the China shop, but it's calculated. There's a method to his madness. He knows how to get into paint. He's improved as a playmaker, one of the best rebounders in the league, one of the best defenders in the league. And all of that combined makes up for his lack of shooting. He doesn't need to. Why would you want him out there when he's this good in like a 10 feet, 15 feet radius? Mm-hmm. You don't want him anywhere else but the paint. And I think the Bucks understand that. Giannis knows exactly his role on the court, and he is not just the best at those like in the league at doing so, but he is like one of the best players of recent memory at doing this. So you said he walked into a 25, 8, and 10. This guy has been walking into a 30, 10, like 12 and 6 over the last 4 or 5 years. This is not going to change. Giannis is going to continue to dominate. It's crazy to think he's 11 years into his career. It still like, kind of boggles my mind that he's been in the league that long. But he's a top 2 player. He's a lead. You can make the argument that he is the best defensive player in the league. You can still make that argument to this day, and he is still like one of the best offensive guys, especially when it comes to just getting dunks and layups, and also just like being able to like still have that playmaking bag that he's improved over the last couple of years. So him putting relentless pressure on the rim, just you don't have many guys in the league that can just do that for 36 minutes, do this every single possession, and Giannis is able to. He is a top 2 guy in the league to me. And Jay, our number 1, it's Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, I mean, this is the part of the podcast where things kind of drop off because me and TV had a fun time kind of arguing back and forth. And TV, by the way, take note of this, bro. We might need to build more podcasts that are around this debate topic. Not necessarily like top tens, but like we might need to have more debate based like episodes because there's a little bit more that comes out of these sometimes. It's funny how our minds work. We're similar in basketball minds some ways, but there's some stuff that we do disagree on. And it's fun to kind of hear those disagreements. But this is one we've agreed on for like years. Like me and TV have kind of went to bat for this one for like a little while now.
Yes.
We've made podcast tours doing this. Like this is just how things have been, bro.
Yeah.
Jokic is the best player in ball. I just think that when you talk about offensive dominance, it's not even close. I don't think there's a single player that I view as more dynamic in terms of overall like offensive creation, not just for himself, but for others. I don't think there's another player that matches it. I love Luka Doncic. I love Giannis. I love Embiid. I love Braun. I just don't think there's anybody who, like, as an offensive hub, can do what can do what Nikola Jokic does. I just don't. No. I don't see it. And he's improved as a defender. He's not an elite rim defender or anything like that, but he has improved as a defender. He's improved both around the rim and improved in space, which is actually probably the most important thing because that's how Golden State was picking on him back a couple of years ago, was the fact that they were being able to attack him in space. He's improved as a defender in space. He's improved as a rim defender, despite the fact that he's not some big-time shot blocker or anything. And then when you look at the offensive side of the ball, like, I mean, what do you do? What do you do?
Okay. This is my argument for Jokic and why he's number one. You can't do anything to stop this. No matter what defense you throw at him, you're gonna let him go number one, like one-on-one. He has the post fade, he has the Euro step, he has the drop step, he has the entire post bag. He can hit the three ball, he can hit the mid range. He has every single move in the book. You want to try to throw a double with him because he's too good offensively? This guy is arguably the best passer in the league. There's nothing you can do, and there's no one I can say with like certainty, probably like since the turn of the century, probably in like, there's a chance like you can even make an argument like an all-time sense where you haven't seen a guy who commands so much on the offensive end that no matter what you do, he's gonna get what he wants. Even in the passing element, like we've seen how much people, like the game of Bruce Brown has grown, Aaron Gordon, KCP, all these guys have been seen as a lot more valuable assets because of Nikola Jokic's passing ability and playing under this system. He just makes everyone else better. He is already like one of the best offensive players in the league. He does everything. And even though like he is maybe not the elite defender that Giannis is or Embiid or Anthony Davis, he's good enough, and he's just too much of a dominant force on the offensive end, scoring and playmaking that's what he's there for, for as long as he wants. That's the thing. For as long as he wants, he can do this for as long as he wants.
TV, this is my other cherry on top, and this is kind of like my last point. Let's put this in perspective. The Minnesota Timberwolves had to beat the Denver Nuggets in a full 7 of a 7-game series, in a series where the Nuggets had a hobbled Jamal Murray, a Michael Porter Jr. who had not played up to his regular season status, and Aaron Gordon who was not nearly as effective during the postseason as he was during the regular season. And in the process, and no bench, which we kind of were already aware of throughout the regular season, but no bench, which obviously hurt them in a series against Minnesota where they just felt much deeper of a roster than Denver was. But then most importantly, it took a scheme defensively for the Minnesota Timberwolves that involved you throwing Karl Anthony Towns, Naz Reid, and Rudy Gobert at Jokic to slow the Nuggets down. That was the equalizer in that series, was the fact that they were able to utilize the physicality of throwing 3 different bigs at Jokic to be able to slow him down offensively. And it still was only enough for them to win the series in 7 games, with the last game 8-point victory. That just goes to show you that if Jokic has any kind of legitimate help in any given season, like, they're championship contenders, period, point blank.
I mean, if stopping Nikola Jokic is 29, 11 and a half, 8 assists,
right,
and 50% from the field, and stopping Nikola Jokic, it took all of that. He's the best player in the league. We'll stop it right there.
Jeez,
but yeah,
man, there you go.
But yeah, that's our top 10 list, man. There's a lot of discussion there, a lot of debate, But we ultimately near the end we came to disagreement that Nikola Jokic is the best player in basketball. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Who did we get this right? Did I put some guys too high? Did Jay put some guys too low? Any of those things you can you can put it down in the comments section down below. Man, this has been an awesome episode, but I did want to end up with a hit your free throw staple, which is a quiz. And Jay, for this one, it's kind of similar to our top 10 list actually, because when I was scrolling through the internet, I came across one of those old basketball forums, and all the way back from 2003, 2004. And there was a whole discussion post on who are the top 10 players in the league of the 2003-2004 season. Okay. And as a consensus from that forum, I have the top 10 list right here. So Jay, from the 2003-2004 season, according to this forum, at that time, who were the best players in the basketball in the NBA during that season?
Wow. Interesting. That's a 2000. So 2003, 2004. So this is LeBron James rookie year, like that kind of.
LeBron James rookie year, yeah.
Oh. Okay. Tim Duncan.
Number 1 in the league. They came to the consensus that he's the best player in the league.
Kobe.
Number 3.
Shaq.
Number 4.
2003. Like KG maybe.
Number 2. You got the top 4 already. I think those are the 4 easiest. This is where things get kind of wild from 5 to 10.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And remember, this is a consensus from this forum. I'm gonna try to find like the forum name because this was kind of funny. Straight Hoops. This is a 2004 post.
Oh, what the heck? Okay.
This is a post from 2004. So this is like what like they came to as a consensus on this basketball forum.
2003 is such a weird year though. Let me like really get in my bag. Oh, I know this is a weird one, but around 2003 he was getting super glazed. It's like Peja Stojakovic on the list.
Number 10.
Oh, that's a clutch pull. I'm not gonna lie. They were glazing. They were glazing Peja as a 3-point shooter back in the day. Oh my gosh.
10. Peja Stojakovic.
Okay. Let's really get in our bag real quick. 2003. What was the finals that year?
I think it was Spurs. I think it was it one of the Spurs Nets years?
I think it was. The reason why I asked that is because I think Jason Kidd's on the list.
Number 6.
Okay, Glaze. Got it. Glaze. Yeah. I'm trying to think in context. Glaze. 2003, 2003, 2004. Chauncey
Billups. Is he even on this? I'm trying to think because like they did this list and they did top 50. He's number 42.
Damn.
This is the year after he moved to. Year after that's when I think that like people like really started looking at Chauncey as that guy.
Okay. But somebody from that Pistons team is Ben Wallace on there?
Number 7.
Okay, somebody from that Pistons team has to be there. Like just because I'm thinking in forum terms. This is not like statistics and shit. I'm using forum logic. So like I'm trying to think who was getting glazed in 2003, 2004.
Pause. Number 7.
Yuck, bro. That sounds crazy.
The 7 best.
Who else in 2003 was like just getting? Is Baron Davis on the list, maybe?
Number 13.
No.
Number 13 on the list, Baron Davis.
Who else is in this mix? It's going to piss me off. I got to get at least one more.
2 of them are like wild. Number 5, I think people forget how great he was as a center. Like, his team didn't have much success, but this guy was a fantastic center in like the early to mid and like the mid to late 2000s.
Name 2 of the teams he played on. If he played for 2 teams, it's kind of like
Pacers and the Raptors, and the Blazers. He played for the Blazers too.
Jermaine O'Neal,
number 5 on the list. Jermaine O'Neal.
Okay. Fine, y'all got it.
I gotta look at his. Okay, as you think of the next person, I gotta look at his stats for this year because that is wild.
Wow. Wow.
He was number 3 in MVP voting this year. 20, 10, and 20.
Which
and 10
team
players.
was this? Which team was
Pacers,
this?
Pacers.
Okay, okay. I guess makes sense, kinda.
Yeah, he was top 3 in MVP voting this year. Okay, fair. You know what? That's fine.
Wow. Wait, he was top 3 in MVP?
Yeah.
Is Andre Karolinko on the list?
Number 9 on the list.
I only asked that because I think wasn't he top 5 DPOY this same time?
I think he was.
I think he was legit top 5 DPOY convo. Like this is like again, I'm thinking forum glazing. So I like
top 5, number 4 most improved, number 13 MVP.
See. Come on, bro. I'm in forum logic mode right now. I was about to say, okay, Andre Karolinko. You gotta remember, this is why people still draft Andre Karolinko on all-time fantasy drafts on 2K. Is because he had some years where he was Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby fused on crack. Like there was a time where Andre Karolinko, you thought he was just like a demon, and he was. But like if you actually look at the stats, he wasn't insane. But if you watch the tape, whole different ball game. So
100%.
Yeah, wow.
So you're missing number 8, and this guy's like AK-47 is wild. This guy's probably wild because this is the best season of his career. Like, you just wouldn't think of him as a top 10, even top 20 player in the league at any point. This guy was a teammate of KG this year.
2003? So we're still Minnesota.
This was his only All-Star appearance this year.
Oh, okay. The only reason I know that is because of what you said. But this is nasty work. Is this ET himself? Is this Sam Cassell?
Number 8, Sam
Cassell. Man, what the heck?
This guy was All-NBA second team this year, top 10 in MVP voting, NBA All-Star. Sam Cassell was that guy this year.
I guess. Wait, what?
Wait
a minute. Here's the real question. So you mean to tell me that in 2003, 2004, somebody thought Minnesota was going to win the championship because they had 2 top 10 players? That's basically what this forum is telling me.
So I'll tell you some guys that just missed out on the top 10. Dirk was 11.
Okay, I don't hate that.
Tracy McGrady was 12. This is Magic T-Mac.
I don't know. I think he's better than Sam Cassell. No,
I think so too.
I'm just saying.
Let's see. You have LeBron in his rookie season was number 16.
I mean,
Paul Pierce was 22 this year. You had Yao Ming at number 17.
Wait. Did we not just do a podcast that included Paul Pierce's name like 8,000 times? Like around this exact era. And he was 22?
Yo, they said that Mike Bibby was a better player than Paul Pierce this year.
Which Mike Bibby is that? That's not Memphis Mike Bibby.
No,
right?
It's Kings.
That's
Bibby.
Kings. Okay. Because I was about to say, you're already wrong, but you're extra wrong.
Yo,
this is about Memphis, like Memphis version.
Yeah, but this is, again, Forum Talk, 2000-2004, the top 10 players in the league.
What the... Who was glazing Sam Cassell? How many upvotes did this man get to get glazed to the top 10? What the world?
Insane. Sam Cassell was 31 the year before, and he got moved into the top 8.
Huh.
The forums were wild.
Wow. Yo, the forums was tweaking. Paul Pierce not a better player than Mike Bibby, and Sam Cassell top 10 is elite, bro.
But
that's S tier comment talk if I've ever seen it, bro. The comment section will never fail you, bro. That's
fantastic. I love this. I absolutely love looking at this list. But this is today's quiz. Let us know how many other quizzes you want to see. Jay, this was a fantastic episode. Thank you guys for watching and listening. What do you have to tell these people before we sign out?
TV, I think we need more debate podcasts. This was fun. I ain't gonna lie. I think it's fun to see where we differ. And again, grill us in the comment section. I know there was some interesting takes here and there. That's what the whole point of the top 10 list is, man. Let's be honest. Like, let's be real. There's a little bit of clickbait that comes with it, but I feel like we both made like valid points across the board. I don't think anybody necessarily reached. TV, before we end the pod, did you just want to read your top 10 out one more time real quick?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Here, I got number 10, Jalen Brunson. Number 9, KD. Number 8, Anthony Edwards. Number 7, Joel Embiid. Number 6, Steph Curry. Number 5, Jason Tatum. Number 4, SGA. Number 3, Luka Doncic. Number 2, Giannis Antetokounmpo. And number 1, Nikola Jokic.
Okay, cool. And like for me, with reordering my list, I'm gonna just go ahead and bump LeBron James down to be my quote-unquote honorable mention. It was Kawhi Leonard originally, but I had a miscount. Nonetheless, my top 10 is gonna be Steph Curry at number 10, Devin Booker at number 9, Kevin Durant at number 8, Anthony Edwards at number 7, Jason Tatum at number 6, Joel Embiid at number 5, Luka Doncic at number 4, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at number 3, Giannis Antetokounmpo at number 2, and me and TV are in the same boat. Nikola Jokic at number 1. Yeah. Crazy list. Took a lot of time for us both to be able to put these together. I'm sure that we both changed our minds a million times, flipped stuff back, put it somewhere else, changed it to something different, started the list over. I'm sure that we had a lot to go throughout this process. I know I did at least. I hope you guys enjoy this kind of content. We're not necessarily going to delve into the clickbaity stuff, but I do think there is an interesting dynamic that we've kind of stumbled upon with these like debate topics to a certain extent. Of course, me and TV, we've been doing podcasting with each other for so long. I think we kind of have a very similar basketball philosophy. So I do think it's always interesting when we do have a difference in opinions. This was one of those episodes. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, obviously. And I mean, we know that the NBA offseason is slowly starting to kind of get to the grind of things where it seems like, it's going to be more offseason workout videos to get people hype and stuff of that nature. But don't sleep, man. Evergreen content is coming. If you thought this was hype, if you thought that these kind of discussions were real, like insightful, we plan on doing some really creative stuff to kind of hold you guys down throughout the offseason.
100%. And you're going to be able to follow along with the Hit Your Free Throws podcast. Remember, we got the clips, Instagram content, TikTok content daily over there. So check it out. YouTube, show some love. Podcast Network, podcast Network, continue to listen if you're over there. And of course, check out our individual stuff, man. We have a lot of stuff coming up this off season. But yeah, awesome episode. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Hope you have a fantastic day. This is TV. This is Jay. We're signing out. Peace.